Okay. And all right, I got the chat up, but again, I'm not good at following the chat, so just feel free to um, chime in. Okay, my name's Jon Peltier. This is a picture of me at a conference a couple of years ago. Looks like I'm guiding a plane for a landing. My background is in engineering, not finance like so many other Excel experts. I have a doctorate in metallurgy, of all things, and I worked as a research scientist and a production metallurgist, gaining insights into manufacturing, statistical process control, and Six Sigma. I have used Excel extensively for over 30 years. My areas of expertise within Excel are data visualization, which is to say charting, as well as data processing with formulas, pivot tables, and other techniques, and VBA programming. I've been a Microsoft Excel MVP since 2001. I started my own company, Peltier Technical Services, in 2004. In fact, I started working full time for Peltier Tech 20 years ago this past week, 21 years ago this past week. You can email me at john@peltiertech.com. If you have a question about this presentation or about any Excel topic, really, shoot me a message. Say, hey, I attended your Flex Your Data talk and I was wondering. My LinkedIn handle is Jon Peltier. I share a little content there and links to new content on my blog and so forth. The Peltier Tech website actually predates Peltier Tech. I started as a Yahoo GeoCities site in 2001. Anybody remember GeoCities? I moved to peltiertech.com in 2004, and it became a WordPress blog in 2008. And since then, it's accumulated hundreds of tutorials on many Excel topics, specializing in charting and VBA. Peltier Tech works on custom Excel projects for clients based on my expertise in data management, charting, and VBA. Peltier Tech builds, maintains, and markets charting add-ins for Excel, and Peltier Tech provides training in beginning and advanced Excel topics. For details, visit the website, peltiertech.com. My talk today is about robust dynamic charts with dynamic arrays and names. By dynamic charts, I mean a chart that will expand and contract as the data range itself expands and contracts. I'm going to start with a very brief review of charts. This is a simple chart. It's an XY chart, and here's the data that I'm using. When you select a chart, if the chart uses a contiguous block of data, that data is highlighted in the chart. And if you select a series, the data for the series is highlighted, and the series name is highlighted in red, the X values or category labels in purple, and the Y values in blue. And I've used this kind of light shading just to remind us what we're doing with the data. And when you click on a series in a chart, there's a series formula up in the formula bar. All you can put into it are links to various things, various data, but it's still a powerful way of editing the chart data without having to go into one of the more cumbersome dialogues that Excel has. The series formula has 4 different parts to it. You see it says review C4, review B5, B9, and so forth. The first argument is the series name. And the second argument is where to find the X values. The third argument is the Y values. And the fourth argument is the series order. If you have a bubble chart, there's a fifth argument for the bubble sizes. So, and you can actually come in here and edit the series formula just like any other formula. And so that's the series formula. It's color coded here. It doesn't color code when you select it and view the active formula. So what are dynamic charts? Like I said, they're charts that update automatically as the size of the data range changes. The old-fashioned way to do dynamic charts are to use name ranges or define names. It's more difficult than some of the newer tricks, but it's a lot more flexible. You would define a name based on a formula, and you'd have to use index or offset, and you'd have to count rows and so forth to make sure it's the right size and so forth. And sometimes that's a little bit tedious, and it makes it a little bit harder for someone who's not familiar with it. But it makes nice dynamic charts. Then in Excel 2003, there was a new feature called a list, and that evolved into tables in 2007. And that feature has actually been refined further over the years. And that's a simple way of making dynamic charts. If you use like a whole column of a table in your chart, if the table adds or removes rows, any formula in Excel, including the series formula that points to that column, will still keep pointing to that column, even though the column has changed size. And that means the chart data will expand if the table expands. Now, recently, I guess in the past about 4 years, Microsoft has introduced dynamic arrays with Excel, where one formula spills into as large a range as it needs for its output. And very soon after introducing dynamic arrays, they realized they could use some of the same mechanism that tables use in order to make charts dynamic that reference a dynamic array. It works pretty well. It's not perfectly implemented. It's not as good as using the tables, and I'll explain a few reasons why. And then I'm going to just show how you can define names based on dynamic arrays. It's a lot easier than defining names in the old days. So if we have a static chart, here's my data range. I click on the chart series and I can see here's my data range, and I can add a row. So 5, and the formula, since I have formulas above, that fills down when I add data below. And I can add another one, and it keeps filling down. And so the range in the worksheet expands, but the chart doesn't know anything about that other data. So I would have to select the chart, and I would have to drag those little highlights in order to expand the chart source data. I have to do it manually. It's not dynamic. It doesn't automatically do it. By the same token, if I were to delete this data, it doesn't plot it, but that's because those are blank cells, and the chart is still looking for data in that range. It's not dynamic. If I use tables, that is dynamic. So I'll select this series, and you can see the data that it uses. If I add a row to the table, the chart automatically updates, and I can click on it and I can see that my series data has expanded. And in fact, let me fix that. I didn't need to do it the way I did. I'm just going to drag the corner down because I have formulas in both columns here to calculate my X and Y values, so I don't type something silly. And you see, as I expand the table or as I delete rows, let me control minus will delete those rows. You see the chart keeps up because it's keeping up with the data. It's not just plotting, it's not just ignoring blank rows in the data range. And this works if I have one series or if I have two series in a table. This chart here only uses the first Y column. This chart uses both Y columns. And if I expand my data, both charts, all the series that link to that column expand. Okay, that makes sense. If I come over to this example, I have two different series in my chart, and each one points to a different table. And so if I expand one table, the corresponding series expands. The other one didn't expand, of course, because that table didn't expand, but I can stretch that table out, and you can see that any series in that chart that's linked to any table anywhere will change as the table itself changes. So now with dynamic arrays, it works similarly. So here I have a data range that my chart is pointing to. There's a formula here. It's just a lambda it's the same formula I used to calculate X and Y in the table, but it puts the X and Y together into a single output spill range. So it links to this cell, and if I change this cell, it changes the number of rows in the output. So if I change that to 7, you see the range has expanded, and so has the dynamic, so has the chart. So it works pretty much the way it does with tables in this case. And this example, I have a lambda. You can see it doesn't include the header row, it's just the data. Over here, I have a similar lambda, which just uses HStack to put, excuse me, it uses VStack to put the header row on top of the data. And this chart links to that dynamic range. And if I change the number of rows, that that chart will expand with the number of rows. So it doesn't matter if the header is included or not. And now this example, I have two Y values in here. So this chart uses both Y values. This one only uses one of them. Both will expand as the dynamic array changes. If I can change that to the 3 rows and they shrink, and that's because what they link to has also shrunk. Now, this is where dynamic arrays don't work as well as using tables. I have 2 dynamic arrays, and they point to, I have 2 series in the chart, and they point to 2 different dynamic arrays. And if I change the number of rows here, if I change that, say, to 7, both of these ranges extend. You see they've added a couple of rows. These tables, these series in the chart have not expanded. So if everything comes from a single dynamic array, it does expand. If it comes from multiple dynamic arrays, you're out of luck. So what you would have to do is build another dynamic array which would combine them together, which I've done. And now here I have the same dynamic array as before, which provides the data for this series here, the blue series. But I've added another point here, which I'm calling target. And if I change the number of rows in my dynamic array, the number of points in that series doesn't change because this one data point, which is not from the dynamic array, is blocking the dynamic nature of the chart. This doesn't always happen, and I haven't quite figured out when it does and when it doesn't. But since so many of the chart tricks I have use other data to get other effects, either a label somewhere where I want it, or maybe I'll use an error bar for a horizontal line for my target. Since I use extra data, it blocks the linkage between the dynamic array and the chart.
So, John,
yes.
Do the series in Excel charts, do they have an order?
Like, they do have an order.
Yeah. So is it considering?
And
is it blocking if it's in the wrong order?
No, I don't think that's it. I've experimented with that, and I don't think that's it. I think it's just that if there is some foreign data that's not part of the dynamic array, the chart loses track of the dynamic array. So the linkage isn't as strong as between a chart and the source data that's in tables. Good question. I asked it too, and I experimented. Not enough to see. And in fact, at one point, I noticed that a couple of my new workbooks, an external series wasn't blocking a dynamic array, and my older workbooks were. And I thought, well, maybe there's something about maybe they changed something in the meantime, but my old workbook is polluted. And then you see this new workbook is blocked, and this is a new workbook. So it wasn't even something like that. You never know. But so here are some of the problems using dynamic arrays. First, if the X and Y values aren't from the different array, it's not dynamic. If you have multiple series from different arrays, it's not dynamic. If you have added some series from static data, it might not be dynamic. It's probably not dynamic, but sometimes it is. And I wonder if, we were talking about bugs, if maybe it's a bug that it is dynamic that, who knows? But then there's another issue. If you insert or delete rows and columns to the left of or above your dynamic array, the chart data range misrepresents the dynamic array spill ranges. And so your chart gets messed up. And what's even worse is when you do that, Control Z doesn't always undo the change you made. And let me illustrate this. This is kind of a shocking thing. So here I have my chart is pointing to this data, and it's plotting just fine, and it's dynamic. I don't have to, well, I can demonstrate it. It's dynamic. And let's insert a row. So you column. You select the column, Control plus, and it inserts. And look, all of a sudden my chart is broken. And let's see if we can figure that out. I'll click on the chart, and you see now my range is wider than the dynamic array. The X values haven't moved even though I inserted a row. And now it thinks I have two columns of Y data. So that, and I can change that now, but it kind of broke the dynamic nature of the chart, the linkage of the chart. If I do Control Z and remove that inserted row, then I'm back to normal. That's fine. If I instead delete a column, I still have points now, but it lost my X values. You see, there's a blank instead of X values in the series formula. And since all it's looking at is the number of points, the first point, it doesn't have an X value, so it says you're at X equals 1. The second point, you're at X equals 2. So we're offset on this axis. Now, if I Control Z, then I'm back where I started. That's fine. But what it means is if you have to rearrange your sheet, what you really have to do is copy this whole range and actually cut it and paste it, or you can drag it, and that would work fine. But when you're inserting or deleting rows, it's not so good. Let me insert a row, and we see again my X values are wrong, and can't even see. Okay, so I select the one series, and it didn't move the top of the X and the Y range down. It moved the series name down. But so the chart forgot how that worked. So let me do Control Z, and it's still broken. So now it moved it up fine. So what I have to do is select this range, and let me drag that down. Let me drag this down so I can drag the bottom up. Now the chart works again. And if I delete a row, you see it's now broken again. It's not broken as badly, but you see the top of the X and Y ranges didn't keep up with the moving data range. And I can fix it like this, or let's not fix it. If I do Control Z, it's still broken because it moved it down. Actually, I don't know what it did. It just messed it up. So if I Control Z again, it's like I said, this breaks the linkage to the charts. So how are we going to fix it? We're going to step back to the pre-table Excel days, and we'll define names for the chart data. And we'll need 3 names for each series. One of them is a series name, one is the X values, and one is the Y values. And what we'll do is we'll take those names and enter them in the series formula in place of the cell references. If you worked in Excel 25 years ago, you did a lot of things like this. But a couple of details. We're going to scope our defined names to the worksheet, not the workbook. It works with workbook names, but scoping it to the worksheet means that then if I copy this sheet, then I can have independent X values and Y values in the different sheets. And of course, once you have multiple charts, then you have to be more creative with your naming, but that's okay. Another trick is the names shouldn't begin with the letters R or C, or in your own local language, it shouldn't begin with the letters that the words for row and column begin with. For some reason, I mean, the names will still work in a chart, but you can't enter those names into the series formula. You have to go to the select data dialog, which I avoid as much as possible. So in the old days, most of the names that were defined for charts used offset. So I'm going to define some names with offset. And I'm going to, when I define names, usually I'll write the formula in a cell first to make sure the formula works. And then I'll copy that formula and paste it into the definition of the name that I'm defining. So what I want to do is write a formula that refers to the series name or the highlighted cell there, C4. So I'm going to use equals and offset. And it's actually easier to write an offset formula for a dynamic array than just for a generic range. So what I'm going to do is reference the dynamic array, which is B4, and I'm going to click the F4 key to put dollar signs on it to make it an absolute reference. And then I'll put a hash at the end of it, and that references that whole dynamic array. You see how the whole area is selected. And I want to offset down 0 rows, to the right 1 column, and I want it to be 1 row high and 1 column wide, and that should be my series name, and that's linking to the cell that I wanted it to. X values is a similar thing, and I'll say offset, and again, I'll use the B4, and I'll hit the F4 key and the hash, and I want to offset from that. I want to go down 1 row. I want to go to the right 0 rows. And how tall is it going to be? As tall as the dynamic array -1. So rows, and then again, the dynamic array, and F4, Shift F3. I told somebody once that Shift F3 was the shortcut for adding the hash reference, and really it's just the way you type a hash. But so it's the rows of that range -1. Sometimes there's a little delay when you type something. The character takes half a second before it appears, which makes me crazy. And we want it to be 1 column wide. And here's our data. Excuse me. And the same for the Y values. And in fact, because I'm too lazy to type it all, I'm going to copy that. And I'll paste it here. And I want to offset 1 column as well as 1 row. And now here are the Y values that I'm expecting. Okay, so now, and I'm going to use the name of this formula. I'm going to use O for offset name, O for X values, offset X values, O for offset Y values. So let me just copy this, and I'll come up to the Formulas tab, define name, and the name I'm going to use is O name, and I'm going to scope it to the offset worksheet, and I'll paste this in here, and I'll say, okay. And for my X values, I'll do the same thing. I'll copy that formula, define name, and I'll call it O X values, X vals. Again, I'll scope it to offset and paste that in here and say okay. And then one more time, I'm going to go here and O Y vals and scope it. This is a really inconvenient dialog, but at least one thing you can do is stretch it. If you have a longer formula, you can see the whole formula. So let me paste that in here. And this is the Y value, so I just want to change that 0 to a 1. And I'll say OK. How do we check the names? We can use the name manager. And you see, these are the tables I used in the previous worksheets. And name. And it has the refers to formula here, but also down here. And you can click in that box, and it shows you what that formula refers to. And it said, OK, that looks good. And X values, I'll click in the formula. Yep, those are my X values. And the Y values, click in that formula. Yeah, that looks good. If you work a lot with names, you'll see over here I have another name manager. And this name manager, it was built by an Excel MVP named Jon Peltier. He's in the Netherlands. And this is a much more powerful name manager than the one that's built in. I'm only going to look at the visible names here. Once you start having formulas and so forth, you get a bunch of temporary names here that are used within the formulas, and it clutters the view. So I'm just going to stick with the visible names. And you see here that it says offset, O name, OX vals, OY vals. That's great. So it's a free add-in. It doesn't cost anything. It's very powerful. So let's just do another test. So I want to test my name. Sometimes I do it this way instead of going to the name manager, and I'll say equals O name. Yep, that worked. Equals O X vals. And that worked. And O, not 0, Y vals. And if I do equals, and now let's fix our chart. This chart, you see the series formula, it refers to that range, but it does so using the cell references. And all you have to do is select the cell reference and replace it with the name that you've given to that cell reference. And I'll do this for O X vals and O Y vals. And it accepted the name just fine, the names. And so I can test it further by expanding. Well, let me shrink it first. And the names all change. You see, it's only 4 rows for the X and the Y values. And the chart still only looks at the new definition from the dynamic array. But I don't have to worry about what happens if I remove a row, or what happens if let me undo that and let me insert, that's a column, not a row. It doesn't affect the chart at all. So it's only a little bit more work, but it makes it a lot more robust. And if I had multiple series for multiple dynamic arrays and they all had little names, I'd have to use a bunch of different, I might call it X1 values, X2 vals, and so forth for the different series in the chart. As long as you don't begin it with a C or an R. Now, there's some knowledgeable people that will say offset's fine, but offset is a volatile function, which means it recalculates every time anything recalculates in Excel, so it can slow things down. The fact is, offset is a very fast formula. So even though it's volatile, it calculates very quickly. And unless you have a lot of large offset formulas, you probably won't notice any slowdown because of it. But okay, to be a purist about it, let's look at what the index formulas would be. And that's easy. I want the first row, second column of my dynamic array. So B4, F4, hash. And I want the first row, second column, and there we are. And for my X values, equals index. And I want to start in the first row, in the second row, first column. So we'll start with that dynamic array F4 hash and 2 comma 1. And I'll use the colon, and now I'll specify the last cell in this formula, and that's also going to be index, and it'll be B4, F4, shift 3 again, and I want to do the last row, so I have to count the number of rows in my dynamic array. And it's also going to be the first column. And here's my X values. And because nobody wants to watch me type, I'm just going to copy that, and I'll come down here and I'll paste it in, and I'll change from the first column to the second column. And there's my my Y values. So let's first test it just to make sure. And no, first I have to define those names. So let me copy that formula, and I'll come up to Formulas tab where I already am, and I'm going to call this I name. And this time I'll scope it to the Index tab. Paste. And I'll do the same with this formula. And that's I X vals. And we scope it, Index. And I'll do the same for that one. I've already copied the one formula. So this is I Y vals. And we scope it. And let me just change it to the second column. I wish they could make the text a little bit bigger. I've been doing Excel so long that my eyes, they're getting old. So let's just test my names. This equals IX vals. So those all look like they work. So let's fix the chart again. And we'll call it I name. And we'll call it IX vals. And we'll call it IY vals. And that worked fine. And let's just test the dynamic nature of it. And that's dynamic. And we'll make it larger. It's still dynamic. So these formulas are nice. Now, using index, great. We've gotten away from the volatile functions. And the formulas are actually pretty easy to read and understand. They're a little bit longer than the offset formulas were. The offset is about 2/3 as many characters, maybe. Now, when we got dynamic arrays, we got a lot of helper functions that we can use. And for example, the take function. So my name, I can easily say equals take. And I'll select my range here, F4, shift 3, and I'll take the first row, because it's the header row, and I'll take the last column, which is -1, one from the end. And you can use things like choose cols, whatever, if you have more than just the two columns. But that's all I need for this example. For my X values, I'm going to, if I start with, I want to drop the header row. And then after I drop the header row, I'm going to take the first column. So let me start with equals take. And I'll drop. And again, I'll start with my dynamic array. And then I'm going to drop the first row. And from that, I want to take, I'm going to skip one because I'm going to keep all the rows in it. I'm going to take the first column. And there's my X values. And because the Y values is very similar, I'm just going to copy and paste. And I want the last row, which means 1 from the end, so -1. And here's my X values. I mean, my Y values. I knew what I meant. So let's just define these names. Copy. And I'm going to use the prefix of A for array. So I'm going to call this A name. And we'll scope it to the array sheet. Paste. There it is. Almost done. Define name. This is AX vals. And I'll do AY vals. I hope all of this repetition isn't too tedious, but I figure once you've seen it about 4 times in a row, the process will make sense again. So there's my names all defined. I can come up to the name manager and I see I have A name XY, I name XY, O name XY. Those are all the names that I've defined. And let's just test them just to be sure. A name. It just seems like if you test it first, if there's an error, you can fix it easier than if you test it when you enter it in the chart the first time. AX vals. And AY vals. Okay, no surprises there. Let's go to our chart. And you see these formulas are all nice and compact. And if you've been using dynamic arrays for a little while, they're just very easy. So this is A name, AX vals. The IntelliSense in the chart series formula doesn't show up until you've entered the entire name of the name that you're adding. AY val, it doesn't show up. AY vals, it's there. So it's not as useful as IntelliSense in just a regular formula. But at least it gives you some assurance that you've typed it right. And so now we change the number of rows and the chart updates and everything's cool. So, all right. So really that's the end of my exercise here. We have Owen said there was a problem with the link, the join link. And Luis has asked, have I tried the name definition from Power Query, like when I pull data from a database and have the plots refreshed after each pull? I have not tried that. I don't work with Power Query that much. And so I haven't tried that technique. That's something that
I would think that it would follow the same rules as working with a table, because a Power Query just populates a query table.
Well, yeah, I was thinking that. And I mean, what I showed with dynamic charts based on tables, it doesn't matter if you built this table yourself or if it was dumped here by Power Query. So that would still be a nice dynamic chart. Any more questions?
Hi, John. Thank you for this presentation. I have one question.
Yes.
Are you aware if we have a name range when the rows are changing, it's obvious that it works fine. What if the columns change? So what if you have a dynamic array that it might add or remove columns depending on some conditions?
Yeah. Let me show you that. What I'm going to do here is I'll show you what. Whoops, controls. I got excited. What happens? This, if I add a column to this table, and I'll show you with dynamic arrays in a second. If I add a column to that table, it won't affect this chart. because this chart doesn't use the whole width of the table. But look at this chart. I'm going to add another column to my table, and I'm just going to add a bunch of random values, 5, 4, 5, 3. You see, it added another series because I added another column. So that's how a table works. And if I go to the dynamic example, let's see, what I'm going to do, because I don't want to mess up the rest of my charts, I'm just going to drag this over. And now, let's see, okay, I'm going to have to come up with a new definition. I didn't have one canned here. He didn't ask me this ahead of time. So we're going to say where's it? Y3 valves. And here I'm just going to say 5 times. No, let's not do that. I'll just use 1 plus X valves. And I'm going to add to my thing at top, I'm going to call it Y3. So I need to add my header, and I need to expand this Y2 valves, Y3 valves. I've never edited a formula like this live in front of people, so I don't know what's going to happen. Look at that. It added that series too. And it's dynamic. So does that answer your question?
Yes, but I recall a few months ago having an issue with that exact situation. And if I recall correctly, I used names like you did. But then
Right.
the
If
site changed. The name was not mapped anymore to the chart. And I had, I think, to use VBA to
okay,
to the
yeah.
name.
So what happens here is if I change my dynamic array so that now I have Y1 and Y2, I don't have names defined for the second column of Y values. I only have it for these here. That's a shortcoming of having to use names for each series. It would be nice if I could just name that whole dynamic array. In fact, I'll show you what will happen in this case. I'm going to make a copy of this chart just so I don't break it. And I'm going to define another name, and let's come up here, define name, and I'll call it my chart data. And I'll scope it again just to this sheet. Whoops, yeah, array is it? That's the one I'm on, and it'll be equals. And let me just go to the name manager and my chart data, and I'll click on it. And here's my data. And it'd be nice if I can use that here. If I go to, I'll right click on the chart and say select data. How about instead of hard coding cell addresses, it'd be nice if I could just do this. That would be the easiest thing with my hash notation there. It doesn't like that. A lot of these other dialogues aren't as smart about dynamic array notation. Conditional formatting, I think, also doesn't do this. So what I would have to do is say array, and I called it my chart data, right? And I'll say enter, and it liked that just fine. And now if I go back to select data, it doesn't remember my chart data here. It just took my chart data and hard-coded what it referred to then into the chart data range formula here. And because we can't do that, we can't just use names to add series when the data range expands to add more series, then we would have to just define more names. I wish I had a better answer to that story.
Yes, thank you.
But we've been complaining about that one since the old days when somebody discovered we could put a name into the series formula. I'm not sure if the Excel team at Microsoft really knew that would work when they were working on Excel. But so, any other questions?
Hi,
So
John.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I would have one question. Thank you very much for your great presentation so far.
Of course.
I have one question regarding the scoping to the sheet
Yes.
instead of the workbook, because I never thought about it, and I think I always scope it to the workbook, and that means I have like a longer name in the series.
Right, because
is that the only, like, is it do you do that because you have a smaller name to put in, and obviously
No.
it's easier to handle, but yeah. Okay.
I do it just kind of when I just make a chart of this range. It gives me the so let me just go here and insert a chart and to the XY chart. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
When I insert that chart, it uses the sheet name, and if the range is in that sheet, for me, for bookkeeping or for comprehension, it just makes sense to keep that scoped to this sheet. And that way too, if I have a duplicate sheet, I can use the same name, but it's different because it has a different sheet name and so forth. Now, of course, there's an issue if I have charts here. In fact, let me get rid of these other charts and I'll show you what that issue is. This series is based on these names that I defined. Now, if I come over here and copy that sheet and I come up to the name manager where formulas name manager, you see that I have duplicate names here. I have a name that's array, sheet array 2, and sheet array. So the name definitions came with the sheet that I copied, and that's great. So I don't have to redefine them. But now what happens with this chart is it loses the linkage to those names. And it does that if they're scoped to the sheet. For some reason, that breaks. And it makes no sense to me. That's just a bug. And that's been a bug in Excel since Excel 97.
Okay.
And maybe earlier. So as we were saying before I got started, it's been a bug so long, it's really just a feature. And so I would have to come back here. But again, the names are there, so it's a couple of seconds to reapply the names. So A, what's that, X vowels, and AY vowels. Now, if I had used a worksheet scope on those names and I copied the sheet, then the chart would have remembered the names. But again, it replaces the sheet name with the workbook name. So that makes it longer. And to me, that has always seemed a little bit less elegant.
Yeah, that's
Not
right.
that, I mean, elegance is nice to have. It's what's more important is that it works and the other names work.
Yeah. One question: if you like in a larger workbook, you sometimes separate the data from the graphs or data from the visualizations they are based on. Would that, with the scoping of the name, also work if your data is on another?
Well, let me show you.
If the chart is on array, but the data is on like data for graphs or something else.
Yeah, so I have all these different names, right? So instead of array 2, let me change the sheet name here to offset.
Mhm.
And that needed to be O named, and I'll change this to offset, and that has to be O xvals. So I can still reference the other worksheet here. I've referenced the sheet name and the name, and there's single quotes around the word offset, and those will go away when I hit enter, but it still works. That's referencing these names. And let me show how it works. I'm just going to make it only 4 points long. You see, that kept up because that links to those sheet level names on the other sheet.
Okay.
Just because
So
I use offset as a prefix. It's the same way as if I use just, I could have said offset C4, and it would have referenced cell C4 on the offset sheet.
okay. So if your data is on the same sheet as the names, then the scoping would work, even if you put the graph on another sheet.
Yeah, and
Did I understand that right?
That's right. So
Okay,
the chart can be on any sheet, and I mean I do that too. I have statistical process control program that I built for another client, and it does all the calculations on a hidden sheet that the user never sees because it's just like it goes out to column D something. It's a lot of helper rows because you have to indicate certain points that are out of control or something. You give them a red marker instead of the black one or whatever. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of intermediate calculations, and so all of the names that I use in the chart, all the data in the chart, I use names, and they all link to the analysis sheet and then whatever the names are. But that just works fine. It's as if I had linked to the cell addresses, but I'm using names because I do the calculations for all the data, but the user might choose to select only some of the data. So I have names that are based on, that column, but it's only, uses offset. So it's only 0.1 to 0.8 instead of plotting all 12 or something like that. So that's why I use names.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So as an extension to that, I don't use names that much, but I'm assuming that a name can refer to data on multiple sheets, and it can be scoped to a sheet where none of the data comes from.
The name can, I could write a name here that is scoped to this sheet, but so the name is scoped to this sheet, but it refers to data on another sheet. Yeah.
So actually it's not, it's the scope of the name that's important for the series formula, not the location of the data.
Yeah. I mean, you have to make sure when you put it in the series formula that here's the name and here's the scope of that name. And the thing is, if I did, let's say I had and I'll do this. I'll just do it with static things just to demonstrate. And this is, I'll use a workbook scoped name, and that references this cell here. And I'll say workbook X. And I'll use workbook Y. When I have my chart like this, it doesn't matter if it's a global, if it's a workbook name. I don't have to worry about that. I just say WB name. You see, that's right. And WBX and WBY. Right now, it looks like it's scoping it to the offset sheet. But if I hit enter, now all of a sudden they're scoped to the whole workbook name. And this is what Stefan was saying about how it's a lot longer formula. I didn't have to type all this stuff. Excel changed it for me. If I had to type all of that, I would go crazy. Another thing you can't do in a series formula, in fact, I tested this last night when I was practicing. What you can do in a cell formula, you can, use Alt Enter and to put word wraps in there, and I can do this so it all lines up nicely and it's easy to read. And Excel doesn't like that. It says, oh, there's a problem with your formula. So I'll say okay here, and it says there's a problem with the formula references, but that's because, well, it's just not that smart.
I think the series function doesn't work the same as other functions, does it?
Well, no, it doesn't. It only accepts, well, either links, like these are links, or for series name, I could just type in something like name, and I could do something silly like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for my X values, and the same for my Y values, and it will use those instead. But yeah, but again, the series formula isn't quite as smart as worksheet formulas. But
yeah, it would be really great if you could put a sequence.
Yeah, wouldn't it?
Some other formula. Yeah.
No, but
Luis has got his hand up.
Okay. In fact, that made me think of something else. Here, let me try something else here. I'm gonna, and I think this is gonna break. Let me bring up humor me for a second. And I'm gonna define a name, and this is gonna be X. And I'm just gonna use equal sequence. And we're gonna say 6. Okay, so that should give me a sequence of 6 numbers equals. So what I'm going to do now is, all right, I'll just put it here, and it's not going to work. Oh, actually, it did work. Usually things like that don't work if they don't somehow link back to a worksheet range.
Okay.
But
I know
okay.
that you can't put lambdas or other kind of lambda helpers in the name manager.
No, you can. No, exactly. So, I mean, there's other things I can use formulas for in the chart, like any text element, like the series name, the chart name, or axis titles, the chart title. I can go equals and select the cell, and that links to that cell. So if the cell changes, then the title will change. But if I wanted to say, I couldn't put a formula here to build a text string to show as my title. I would have to put that formula in the cell and then just link to that cell from here. So, okay, Luis had a question.
Yes,
before
sir.
I went off on a tangent.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Owen. It's really nice to see all the capabilities of the dynamic arrays. Um, I just have like a personal working experience. When you have a file like this that you start sharing with your coworkers and they create a version 2, 3, 4, 5, there's going to be a pile of name tags all over the place. And my question is, John, is it a possibility of creating a document or another sheet having the description of all the name tags instead of going to the name manager?
I don't think you could have such a sheet that would dynamically update. But one of the features of Name Manager, and I don't know which one of these many buttons it is, but it will let you output all this information to a worksheet. And so that might be almost as good.
Yes.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know who created the name manager. Yeah, somewhere there's one that will create a list of all names in a new worksheet. And so I can click this and list the names, the active workbook, yes. Filter the names, and I'm just going to say no. And it created this sheet for me. And here's this sheet, and here's all the names and information about it. So, and this isn't dynamic either. If you need to refresh this, you delete this sheet and add another one. And you see, actually, it gives you a date here. So if you check it in the next week, you can, compare what names have been added since the last time you exported this list.
It looks great to me. Thank you, Jon.
And like I say, that's a free add-in. The thing to do is just type Excel Name Manager into a web search, and I'm sure it will find it for you. So. And George said, referenced my quote when I said something old is new again. And do I think this is a fix that eventually will not be needed? I think you're referring to upgrades to the charting engine. And I have to say that nobody really knows what Microsoft is thinking about with the charting engine. I'm not sure exactly what fix you're talking about. I think about how the dynamic arrays interact with charts when you have multiple dynamic arrays. And I'm thinking that's something that I've discussed with the charting people at Microsoft. And, they're good at, nodding their head and saying, yeah, that's great feedback. They'll accept any feedback. And they're thick-skinned, so it can be positive and negative. Unfortunately, not all the feedback is able to get into the product. So we'll see. Will I have retired by the time that new chart engine comes out? I don't know. If we're going decades at a time before we get an upgrade, it might be quite a while.
Maybe if you put the word Copilot into the request, it might get prioritized.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good point too. It's AI, right? Stefan, you have another question.
Yeah, just a comment. When you showed the scoping to the workbook name in the formula bar, one practical problem I have with this is when you're not editing it in the formula bar, but go to the dialog box, then if the workbook name is as long as this one, you cannot see the entire like the workbook name and your name. So, and this causes problems when you want to maintain this. So the shorter version is really good.
The shorter version is nice. And I mean, you can expand your formula bar.
Yeah,
and see
but
it.
when you go into the dialog box of the chart, then
right.
You won't see it, and in there you have some problems.
In select data, yeah. So
yeah,
I
and
can
then there edit and
yeah.
and then this
one. So you have
and
to.
even if you click, I guess
it's
yeah.
I mean you can you can
You can point,
you use the arrow keys and it selects the range. So
yeah, and you insert it, and you have to go out, and you have to go in, and it's a bit of mess.
And then remember to hit the F2 so it doesn't do that. I mean, I usually just kind of drag and then click like this. But
I'm just saying that this causes problems for me.
Yeah.
And one other thing which for me causes problem where I had a problem with is when I switched to dynamic arrays for charting, and then I had like I have a bigger workbook. And when you accidentally, or like when you delete the data, but you put the but you don't delete the chart, and you close the workbook and you open it, or then you get like an error message along the lines, anywhere in this workbook could be an error in a cell or a name or a chart, and if you don't actively remember that, you go crazy.
Yeah,
so
that's something that
should make sure not to delete the data and have the chart still in, because then
that error is so frustrating, because obviously Excel knows there's a problem, but it only says there's a problem with some formulas in your workbook. Tell me which formulas and I'll fix them. And it happens a lot with charts, and you have to go into every single chart. And very often you can't even tell by looking at the chart what the problem is. So you have to look at it here and no, those look right. And you go into and I go into this dialogue as infrequently as possible, because I hate this dialogue. If you come up here to help and feedback, whenever I get that dialogue, even if I've reported it 20 times already, I'll come here, I'll report the problem, and they're tired of hearing from me. They do read these things, and I do get responses from them from time to time. And also, I mean, I know the program managers at Microsoft. So very often when I have this and it comes up, I'll say this is for Jake Armstrong, or this is for Johnny Thomas or something. So it will find their way to a certain person there. I probably send in like 150 of those a year. So, and I try to encourage people to do that, because even if they don't act on a particular one, if the same issue keeps getting flagged by different people, then they'll know it's not me just being grumpy.
Okay, thank you.
So. Leonid, that's a neat trick that I never remember about, but you can paste at least the names of your names into a sheet. So, okay, any further questions? These meetups are fun. I'm glad we had such good attendance. For a Saturday, I'm impressed.
Yeah, there was an issue with the link. I think after we started, the meetup.com hid the join link.
And
so people who came like 10 minutes after the hour couldn't get in.
That's
struggled for a while.
Why would they do that?
I don't know. It's just destructive.
Never know.
Next time I'm going to put the link in the event description to begin with. Or maybe just use Zoom.
Or use Zoom, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I never start my own Teams meetings. What's interesting is the only time I have trouble with Teams is when I'm meeting with someone from Microsoft. They just put like 3 extra layers of, I guess they think it's security. I guess it's secure if nobody can get in at all. But it's I mean, the product, other than Microsoft's handling of accounts, the product is pretty good. But I've never had that kind of issue with Zoom.
Right, exactly.
So, well,
okay, I think we're wrapping up. Has anyone got any final questions for John?
And if you think of a question later, just shoot me an email.
Thank you, Luis, and everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you specifically to those who struggled with the login but persisted anyway. I appreciate you, and thanks for coming along. There'll be another call like this next week. If you're interested in Python or in R, I recommend you come along. I'll hopefully have something interesting to show you. And I will post updates of new meetups with other people in the coming weeks.
Oh, I had
everybody.
Question here just very quickly. Someone says, what about V5? I have a software package, an Excel add-in. It's called Peltier Tech Charts for Excel, and version 4 is the version that is the current version that is available. I've been working on version 5 for probably about 4 years, and it's just been, the never-ending story trying to get it finished. And I keep promising that it's coming soon. And James, I should have it available in the next couple of weeks or so. It won't be quite the final version 5. It'll be about like version 4.95. But I just want to get it out there because it's got a lot more features than the old version. And so as soon as I can, I'll get it out there. So thanks for asking. And thanks everyone.
Stefan is asking if you could share the workbook with the formulas inserted.
Yeah, I can do that. I'll share it just like this, and it'll include a bunch of these other crazy things I did. So I always save these because I go back and I look at things, and sometimes the examples I choose aren't as good as they could have been. So it helps me with that kind of planning. So yeah, so I'll go back and I'll make this one available too.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks. Right. Thanks again. I'm stopping the recording finally.
Okay. So long, everybody.